Yeah, today I want to talk about future-proofing, preparing for unpredictability. I guess you already introduced me, but hi, my name is Yan. And I want to start my talk, start it today by going back to 1989. 1989 was a great year. It was the year that I was born, and it was such a good year that even Taylor Swift named an album after it. So 1989 is also really relevant for us living in Japan because at the time, Japan was crushing it worldwide. 1989 was the peak of global Japanese business dominance. So I have a little graphic here. Out of the top 20 companies by market capitalization in the world, 14 of them were Japanese, right? That's 70%, crazy number. And in fact, if you looked at the top 50 companies in 1989 for market cap, Japan was 32 of those companies. So that's still like 64%, which is crazy for a little island nation, right? And back then, Japan had just this really clear vision for what the future looked like. And that vision, in fact, is still so strong that even 30 years, today, it's still alive and well, right? The image that people have of Japan is that it's like this really technologically advanced country. Like that was how far ahead Japan was. And Japan in 1989 was really paving the way for our technological future. 1989 is also a really important year because that was when the World Wide Web got started. And the World Wide Web eventually ushered in the internet and software revolution. So up until 1989, the world did change pretty dramatically as well, but it was on just a much slower timescale. It was mostly decades, right? It took airplanes 68 years to get to 50 million users. It took automobiles 62. It even took the television 22 years until at least 15 million people had it in their homes. But since 1989, with the adoption of the internet, the pace has gotten just significantly faster. And this change has been mostly software driven. So here's just a really cool graphic that I found to illustrate exactly how fast things have gotten, right? We went from decades to years, and then Pokemon Go just reached 50 million users in only 19 days. So that's crazy, that amount of speed. So in 2019, with all the changes happening in the world, all Japanese companies had basically dropped out of the top 20 companies by market cap in the world. And in fact, in only the top 50, Japan had one company. Toyota is currently number 41 in the top 50. And this market capitalization of Japanese companies just continues to decline. Now, I know before I go on making any more like presumptuous remarks, I want to quickly talk about what I do. Clifford already introduced me. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Chrysalis. We're a coding bootcamp that started in 2017, and I started it with my co-founder. If you don't know what coding bootcamps are, they're an alternative education program. So our main program is 12 weeks. So people are with us full-time for 12 weeks, and our graduates go directly into the tech industry to work as software engineers. We didn't invent coding bootcamps. Coding bootcamps have been around for a few years already. They started in Silicon Valley around 2013. And they started because there was a big shortage of software engineering talent to feed all of that startup activity that was happening. And that shortage in IT talent is even greater in Japan. So this is why we started Code Chrysalis. We not only help individuals make career changes, but we've also been able to work with really large companies, large enterprise in Japan, like Mercari, some of the NTTs, NRI, Nomura Securities. We've helped these companies re-engineer their teams. And so it's given me a particularly good front seat for how Japan has done and what has happened. Now, last year at IGNITE Sendai, I talked a lot about why Japan's been decreasing overall in competitiveness in the world. And this year, I wanted to share with you some of the things that I've learned about future-proofing and how Japan can be better equipped for the future. So what is future-proofing? I went on Wikipedia and found the definition: the process of anticipating the future and developing methods of minimizing the effects of shocks and stresses of future events. Whew. So I'll translate. In other words, how do you predict the future and save yourself? And this has become a really relevant issue for us in 2020, right? This year is incredibly unpredictable. And 2020 has, I think, certainly accelerated the rate of disruptive events happening, right? Instead of having one disruptive event, we have a bunch and they're all together. But as we saw in this previous chart that I showed, unpredictable things, globally disruptive things, they've been happening for a very long time, right? We've just simply had longer to adapt and adjust. The future has always been really unpredictable. Of course, there's always people who pretend that they were right, but in truth, no one's ever been right about everything, right? And now the future comes at us at a much, much faster pace. So what can we do? We can do a little bit of future proofing. So I think there are three things that we can do. The first one is building cross-functional teams and capabilities. The second one is upskilling and reskilling the talent that we have, and embracing diversity as a business strategy. And I think these three things, all of them in combination, are really necessary for how we can adapt to the fast rate of change that we're seeing in the world today. So let me start by first talking about building cross-functional teams. I saw this quote in the New York Times very recently about how COVID has changed the way that startups in Silicon Valley run. And it really resonated with me because at the start of the pandemic, this is what I was personally experiencing as a founder, right? Code Chrysalis, we're lucky that we were small and nimble enough to do what needed to be done to make fast decisions and adapt to the new environment that we were in. Lauren earlier, the co-founder of Zyco, also presented a really great story for how fast and successfully Zyco pivoted. But of course, we also saw a lot of other companies really, really struggling with speed. And in Japan, companies have these very, I would call them like speed vulnerable corporate structures. And there's two in particular that I think are major culprits for slowing Japanese companies down. The first one is this multiple subcontracting structure that a lot of Japanese companies find themselves in, and siloed organizations and teams. Now, the country has a really strong reliance on system integrators, and these are companies that go in and provide kind of like all the IT systems that a large company might need. And this reliance on SIers, system integrators, has created this crazy web of subcontractors that are several layers deep. Like they'll get a system integrator, and that system integrator will get more system integrators, and they'll get more and more and more. And so you can imagine when something arises, when some change needs to be made, when something has been discovered, these subcontracting layers make it immensely difficult to change the process, either from top down or even from bottom up, right? So if you are in a system integrator company that's on a lower level, it's really difficult for you to sound an alarm when something goes wrong. And most people work in companies that are structured like this, functionally grouped teams that are siloed, right? And we see this all the time. You have software engineers on one team, you have designers on another team, business on another team, marketing on another, testing on another. Everyone's in their own team based on fixed roles. and with static groups. And this isn't just in Japan. We, of course, see this everywhere, right? Most people are working in companies that are structured like this. And so these teams are designed for work in a more predictable future, right? We foresee what needs to be done in continuity, and so we can stay in our roles and continue going forward. But with the world that we live in now, decision-making in traditional functionally grouped teams and companies is just a lot slower. Multiple companies need to be taken into account, right? When you are changing things or moving a gear in one area, it moves all the other gears. And so it slows down the process as well. Now, I think the future is for companies to adopt permanent cross-functional teams that explore what they have to offer. These teams are dynamic and collaborative. They're designed to be nimble and agile and to respond to what is necessary to do now. And I think what's really important is that they have this worldview that anything could happen. We're not masters of the future, and we don't try to be. And by acknowledging and accepting that we don't know what's going to happen, I think cross-functional teams end up adapting better to the future. And you don't have to take my word for it. There are actual experts that have shown this. Both McKinsey and Harvard Business School have done research in 2020 during the pandemic. And they've noted that companies that have deployed cross-functional teams have overall fared better. I love reading about all these examples. My favorite ones, there was an engineering company where their team designed and manufactured ventilators within just 1 week, like before they weren't building ventilators. There was another story where a major retailer launched curbside delivery in 2 days versus the previously planned 18 months. So they were planning like, we'll roll this out in 18 months, and they ended up doing it in just 2 days, right? That level of speed pre-COVID was unthinkable. But I think that's also what's really exciting about cross-functional teams. When deployed and when done correctly, they can really do miracles for businesses. And by having cross-functional teams, you get broken down silos, decisions and processes can get streamlined. Decision-making is even more thorough, even though you're taking less time to make the decision, which is great. There's also an improved sense of purpose from all the different team members. And it pushes organizational boundaries. Your company can do so much more than it thought it could. So, of course, you can't just rely on cross-functional teams to do well. There's also upskilling and reskilling talent. Technology requires us to always be learning. And as we know, tech is driving all industries now. And so we need to always be learning. So like, when I think of this, I think, of course, it's necessary for companies to, in order to future-proof themselves, they should invest in future-proofing their employees, and they need to be supportive of continual learning, right? But that's not what we're seeing in Japan. So there was a recent PwC study of CEOs, and the CEOs in Japan, they looked at CEOs all over the world. The CEOs in Japan were far behind global averages when it came to both tech investments and nurturing their talent. So they had fewer programs and fewer plans to invest in technology and to also make sure that their workforce was well prepared for the future. And of course, nurturing talent is by all measures great for everyone. It's great for the company and it's great for the employees. In another PwC study that was done, they showed just how far ahead companies that had advanced upskilling processes were compared to the global average. So these are companies that have invested more and created more like these upskilling programs for their employees. When employers make good faith efforts to upskill their employees, it builds trust. And that in turn can enhance the organization's reputation in a world where trust is becoming an increasingly valuable commodity. Companies with more upskilling programs or solutions posted 20% higher, stronger corporate culture and employee engagement, workplace productivity, business growth, talent acquisition, innovation, all of those went up. And on top of that, CEOs also reported being more confident about their revenue growth when they invested in upskilling programs. So taking the steps to upskill or reskill really helps organizations build confidence, because I think it shows a really clear practical course of action, right, in our pretty uncertain world. When people hear about upskilling, they think that I'm talking about making everyone an engineer. And I'm not. You don't have to all become software engineers. Sometimes it can simply be teaching someone how to use Slack and Google Drive, or Notion and Zoom, right? This continual learning can be as basic as helping everyone get up to speed on computer literacy, and also empower them to seek SaaS solutions for issues that they might come across to help them become more efficient. We're in a space now where everyone needs to understand tech and its uses, regardless of whether or not they're an engineer. Continued learning also means actively improving soft skills and encouraging a flexible and growth mindset, right? We want employees not to be afraid to try out new roles. We want ourselves not to be afraid of embracing new things. When COVID hit, in banks, for instance, when COVID reduced the need for more people-facing teller jobs, wouldn't it be great if these banks had programs already built out and to help retrain these cashiers to offer better remote customer service, right? So I think there are just so many things that continual learning can just help unleash. And if you are an individual working at a company, don't wait for your company. You should be taking the initiative as well to beef up your own skills and explore what's out there. And of course, you don't need to code, but if you do, please consider us. A little plug there. Companies honestly approach us all the time about upskilling or reskilling their engineering team. But honestly, if the company is still using fax, or if their back office is still paper-based, there's only so much that we can do to help them create a skilled engineering team, right? There's only so much that a skilled engineering team can do. So sometimes digital transformation really just comes from these basics of learning to use different software. And lastly, I want to talk about diversity as a good business strategy. Cross-functional teams give you the power to select people from really diverse backgrounds. And I don't want to show all the research. There's so much research out there. I really had trouble choosing which quote to show. But not just from McKinsey and Forbes, but all over, it's shown that diverse teams are simply better for business. They're better at processing information. And when provided with an inclusionary space, diverse teams provide fresh ideas and quick solutions. When people think of diversity, they're usually just thinking of gender and racial diversity, but there's a lot more to it as well. There's also age, educational background, socioeconomic background, professional experience. These are all things that add value to your decision-making, that add value to the dynamics and the culture of your team, that add value to your team's creativity. So take a look at your team, take a look at your company. Is everyone like you, or is everyone similar? Does everyone have a similar background? If so, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to help make your company better prepared. And so when you add all of these things together, you go from what most companies are like right now with these functionally grouped teams and static roles, to cross-functional teams, to cross-functional teams with dynamic roles that are diverse and continually learning and not held back. Now, what I talked about just now is certainly not easy, and it's not easy to make switches like this, especially in such big corporations. But change is even more necessary now. A previous speaker, Ulrika Shady, called it an aggregate niche strategy. Basically, Japan has been relying on its dominance in focusing on making critical components. And while that's wonderful, I think the vision and ambition that a lot of companies in Japan, at least companies that we hear from, a lot of this vision and ambition that they still hold on to is also having the glory of once again being leaders in technology. And I humbly present some of my views today, knowing full well that this change is difficult. And I think more and more people in this country are in agreement that it is necessary. So I found a quote from Kiichi Ito: "Companies will not be able to survive unless they can review their businesses in a way that is not bound by custom, with society and people's living environment going through massive changes." And the government also recognizes Japan's declining competitiveness in the world. In particular, METI released a digital transformation report in 2018 that emphasized what they call the digital cliff of 2025. In other words, the Japanese economy cannot wait, and action needs to be taken for the future. So let's prepare for unpredictability. Businesses need their people to have the right skills. They need cross-functional teams. They need to embrace diversity. And this is why I love what I do. I think at Code Chrysalis, we are very well placed to help both individuals and companies prepare for unpredictable futures. In particular, our students are from diverse backgrounds and have diverse experiences. They're trained to be flexible. They're courageous learners. They're communicators. We're training talent that is literally well adapted to where our world is going, to the future. And we help companies introduce and nurture cross-functional teams, upskill, enhance, improve, and reignite employees' connections to business purposes. In the long term, upskilling is going to raise employees' productivity as digital transformations progress and more people find themselves working alongside machines, and as automation takes over repetitive tasks. Just investing in an AI team is meaningless if your HR and accounting departments are still using paper and calculators. So I hope that Japan can ganbatte. Japanese companies have a lot of the necessary ingredients, and we'll see what happens